Hey, what's up, y'all? It's Bo Brotherton with Better Together Life and the Shed to House Facebook group. Today, I'm going over a bittersweet thing that happened with our permaculture journey here on our 7.5 acres in Central Texas. So whenever we bought this property back in 2015, before we actually bought the property, I put the option money down to take it off the market. And then I went and I searched out a permaculture designer to make sure that this property was going to be able to do what we wanted to do with it. That was a stipulation that my wife Kelly, who's actually pregnant right now, or she just now had the baby, depending on whenever you are watching this video, she said, hey, I'm all for doing this as long as you hire someone that knows more about growing food than we actually do. And so I found a guy named Pete Van Dyke of Drought Proof, Texas. He's been on our channel probably more than anybody else. And this was something that we always wanted. We always wanted what we thought were swales. We wanted to do permaculture here on our property. And having swales was that thing that we knew that we thought that we knew that we were going to want. And the last time that Pete was here to work on our property, he actually came with an excavator to dig the swales, to create the swales on our property. And he said no. And he killed my permaculture dream. I know that that is a little bit dramatic. It didn't kill the permaculture dream. It killed the idea of having swales on contour on our property. And as you can see, here is a background of our property. The way that the property is laid out and the things that we now want, like we now have a dairy cow. We now have slightly different things involved with chickens than we thought prior. Our land is a very long and narrow rectangle, the 7.5 acres. Here is south, so the sun actually gets decent sun exposure through here. But you see how this is a topo map, which actually Pete can actually create one of these topo maps for you. It's super cheap. I think it's like at $75 now. I'm not 100% sure what his price is, depending on when you're watching this. Link down below to be able to contact Pete. But it's still incredibly cheap. This is, in my opinion, this is like a $300 to $500 thing, and it's no more than like $75 to $100. Like laying out the swales for what we wanted, it would have taken apart everything that we want to do with our cattle, with our dairy cow, and then be able to have a small herd of cattle. The fencing is, as we would be able to do these swales, would have just ruined so many things for trying to do any kind of like creative fencing, because the cattle, it just wouldn't have worked. It would have really created such a havoc of how much more work we would have to have done with this property, because it's a small property, but also it's just so narrow, and the slope is pretty decent. Like it's a pretty far slope to where it drops like 15 feet from the highest point down to the lowest point. So basically, Pete was talking, we were out there and we were surveying the land, and like the first swale, I mean, it just was going to do this weird cut like all the way across, and like almost did, as whenever you're out there, it just, you could see it was almost doing a U-turn. And Pete and I just looked at each other and they were like, is this going to work? Does this make sense? And then we went out to the front and it did some of the same things. So let me say this. You should do on your property what your land calls for. So I will be the first person to say that if I'm not following the land that I have, then I'm just battling an uphill battle anyway. So I can understand that. But it doesn't have to have swales to be able to do very good things on this property. What we're realizing is there's so many trees on this property that there are more creative things we can do to be able to hold water back on the highest point of the property. That's why I've talked about previously of doing pocket ponds, and it actually is working. Like we're seeing really good results. We're getting a lot more amphibians and like frogs and lizards and everything because these pocket ponds hold more moisture, and it's attracting a lot of beneficial animals and like reptiles and stuff that are finding this ecosystem that is improving. So there could have been two things. We could have just went ahead, but whenever this was a raw piece of land, could have went ahead and just done the swales right away. And arguably that probably would have been the best choice for us to do, was to, before we got a house, before we did anything, just go ahead and do the swales. That was out of our budget at that time. Now that we've already been here, it's so much different now than what it was previously. Now that we know what this land does, we know how rotating electric fencing with all of our woods is kind of a pain in the butt. So we're doing more of a static type of chicken system, to where we're giving them a big space, but we're not moving them quite as much. And with the cattle, is we are moving them every single day. But if we had to deal with all of the swales involved, it just wouldn't have worked. And what Pete ended up saying was that this original design that he came up with was made for chickens and maybe some pigs in the forest. He never really did it for cattle. It doesn't mean that this property can't do cattle, but it does mean that what we want has changed. And that's the key of a really good permaculture designer, is he listens to the client. And the client being Kelly, and I like having a milk cow. I'm able to provide a whole lot of like high quality milk for my family and for my animals. With the small property that we have, having the cattle, it really does change the design more. So more what we'll do, especially the amount of work that we're going to have to do, because we have a narrow fence line where all I really have to do is just run some cross fencing across it, and that is so much more affordable than having to do crazy fencing all the way around. Again, this is up for the debate. Put it down in the comments below of good idea or bad idea that we're doing. But at this moment, swales on this property, it's dead. That dream of swales is dead. I do like what Jeff Lawton says, is that permaculture is not swales. Permaculture is not spiral gardens. It's not any of this stuff. Permaculture is the wardrobe. And all of these tactics like composting, swales, rotational grazing, spiral gardens, hugelkulture, like so many things, those are all the hangers within that wardrobe. And if you don't use a decent amount of hangers, then your wardrobe, you're going to be dressed up and you're going to look kind of silly. So that's why you do need to use so many different tactics. The tactic of swales, I would say, would be a good quality B, maybe B plus on this property. But the fact that we want to do the cattle, it lowers it because it really does cut our property in so many different directions. Coming from Pete's words, the person who does this for a living, we don't need to do the swales. That is the death of our permaculture dream, but the actual permaculture dream is just a sidestep. Swales was not the destination for this property. Swales was just supposed to be a vehicle to be able to get the destination of growing more of our own food. Even growing our own food wasn't necessarily the destination. The destination for Kelly and I and the Better Together Homestead is to be able to lessen stress and embrace freedom. Lessen stress and embrace freedom. That's what we want more. We want less stress and more freedom in our lives. We've sometimes been called the laziest homesteaders, and we work our booty off, but yes, we want to be able to watch movies during the day whenever it's hot in Texas, and there are some things that we do to be able to lessen that stress and just have more freedom in our life. Hey, if you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And hey, somewhere up here is one of our homestead tour videos where you can watch, if you haven't seen it, of an entire walkthrough of this property. I know you're going to like it.